Hello, we're going to be discussing establishment of ethics committees today, and our objectives will be essentially to outline the process of establishing an institutional ethics committee, a human research ethics committee, and to discuss the structure, composition, roles and responsibilities of the members of institutional and other types of ethics committees. The first question that comes up is, why do we need an ethics committee at all? It is essential for proposals to be reviewed and approved by an appropriately constituted ethics committee. And as you can see in this slide, the Indian Council of Medical Research has published the 2017 guidelines, and those are going to be the major resource through which we will learn about the roles and responsibilities of ethics committee members. This concept of having an ethics committee at all came in Declaration of Helsinki in 1975 in the second meeting or the second amendment of the Declaration of Helsinki. And since then, all proposals are reviewed by an ethics committee. And obviously, the primary reason why do we ever establish an ethics committee is to safeguard the dignity, the rights, the safety, and the well-being of those research participants who contribute to the research. Now, all proposals, which are whether they are biomedical, whether they are social research, behavioral science, public health research, any need to go to an ethics committee, and the decision about their review has to be taken by an ethics committee, irrespective of whether it is involving a human participant, whether we are talking about biological material, or we are talking about the data that we are acquiring from these individuals. The ethics committee not only will review initially your proposal and approve it, of course, if found appropriate, but they also must monitor to ensure that there is ethical compliance during the conduct of the research. And the second role is a very important role of an ethics committee, that is of continuing review, and has to be performed by all appropriately constituted ethics committees. One of the most important aspects of an ethics committee is that they have to be competent, as in trained, qualified, and they have to be therefore competent to do the function that they are expected to do. And even more important is they have to be independent of the institution they are serving. This is important to avoid conflicts of interest, and we will discuss this as we move along. Who establishes the institutional ethics committee? Obviously, it's the institution. They are called institutional ethics committees, and the responsibility is of the institution. And the institution has to take this responsibility. The institution not only just establishes an ethics committee, the institution must also provide infrastructure, and the ICMR guideline is very clear about this. Should also provide staff, that is a secretariat, should provide space, funds to run this institutional committee, adequate support, and probably the most important is give protected time to a member secretary, because the member secretary's work is really time consuming and needs a lot of dedication in order for them to run ethics committee functions. Now, there are certain situations which we must understand, and I'm going to go into this in a little bit of detail because every institution is different. There may be an institution which has a large number of proposals. It is possible that you have a number of PG students, and therefore all these students' theses have to be reviewed, approved. So it is allowed, and the ICMR guidelines gives very good instructions on this, that if you have more proposals than one EC can handle, you can have more than one EC, not necessarily just 2, you could have 3 or 4. However, what is important is each EC must function as a standalone committee, but follow the same SOPs that each one has. All of them must have the same SOPs, and they should be the institutional ethics committee's SOPs, and they should follow them. That is probably the crux. What if you do not have an institutional ethics committee? What if you do not have access to an ethics committee? Does it mean you don't do research? No. Now the ICMR guideline this time allows you to have an EC which is, or if it's not an EC, an individual, to use the services of the EC of another institution, which is called the host institution. Now, only thing is there are conditions. The host EC should be preferably in the same or adjoining nearby aged areas. And the two institutions, or the individual and the institution, must have an MOU. Also, if your user institution, if it is an institute which does not have its own ethics committee, you need to issue a no objection certificate, because you will understand that when you are an ethics committee, you should be able to review data, look at patients perhaps, look at case records. You must be allowed to do so. So the host institution's EC should be allowed to access data, patients, or anything of the user institution. And this host EC should undertake site monitoring as well in order to ensure continuing oversight. There is one more very interesting caveat that the new new ICMR guidelines have mandated, have allowed. That is that if you have multi-centric biomedical and health research going on, for example, it could be multi-country, but within India, suppose you have 10 sites. They are allowing us now that these 10 sites can choose one main EC for primary review. Of course, the only thing is that if it's multi-country, this main EC has to be located in India and registered with the relevant authority, because as you all know, registering is necessary by law in India for an ethics committee to review a regulatory study. Of course, the local issues, informed consent process, the research implementation, the local monitoring has to be done, continue to be done by the local ethics committee. Another thing that the ICMR guidelines recommend, and this is probably the most crucial thing, is that when you have such multiple ethics committees, there has to be good communication between these ethics committees so that all of them take similar decisions. What about stem cell proposals? Now, the new stem cell guidelines are very clear in their recommendations. You have to have an institutional committee for stem cell research, and this has to follow all the activities that are recommended in the 2017 guidelines, and I would strongly suggest that this is accessed and read by everybody who is doing stem cell research. In the past and even today, if you look at the number of registered ethics committees on the CDSCO website, we have almost 20% ethics committees called independent ethics committees, which are not institutional. The need now, as per the new ICMR guideline, is that this independent ethics committee should be formed by a registered legal entity, be it a business, a trust, a society, whatever it is, but there should be a registered legal entity. That means there should be an overarching control or oversight of this independent ethics committee. So these individuals should not be members of the ethics committee that they will be overseeing, but they will institute it, and then the committee functions in an independent manner, not being told how to function or not interfered with in functioning, but they would be independent. They would, of course, more importantly, follow SOPs, which follow national guidelines. And these independent ethics committees should not accept research proposals from investigators affiliated to institutions that have their own institutional ethics committees, unless there is an MOU again, so that it is clear about confidentiality, privacy of the patients, it is clear about access to data, and it is clear about oversight and monitoring by the independent ethics committees. This is again a very clearly described issue. We come to subcommittees, and these you could have SAE, Serious Adverse Event Monitoring subcommittees. You can have subcommittees for expedited review. These people will have to be part of the main committee. This is one thing again that is re-emphasized by the new ICMR guidelines. The subcommittees will have a chairperson, member secretary, and one or two appropriately designated members of the main EC as per the SOPs. And they have to report, of course, to the main EC. So, what is the composition recommended by an ethics committee? Multidisciplinary always. Multiple people should be there. Multi-sectoral. The ICMR guidelines as well as the CDESCO local law recommends between 7 and 15, not more than 15. If you have more than 15 because you have to, that becomes unwieldy, but that is not in the recommendation. Of course, you can go beyond that if it is not regulatory. Adequate representation of age and gender. Of course, we need to have a balance of men and women in order to address research issues that may affect the individual genders. Preferably half of this committee should be non-affiliated, and this is a very important point because if you have institutional members as part of your committee, there's likely to be, and it's very difficult to avoid a conflict of interest because you know other members in the institution and you may be subconsciously influenced, and there is likely to be some conflict of interest. Therefore, at least half the members should be non-affiliated, should not be in part of your institution. Not only that, there should be a balance between the medical, or if not medical, the social, whichever is the institution, the main type of people in that committee, and the non-technical, the non-medical individuals. That is what brings a mix and match of the committee members, allowing for the best of ethical discussions so that the outcome of the discussion and the decision given is as close to the correct decision as can be possible. Therefore, multidisciplinary, multisectoral, between 7 and 15 with the correct representation of age and gender, preferably 50% non-affiliated and 50% non-medical or non-technical. The ethics committee members have terms of reference, and most importantly, it's the head of the institution who will appoint all these ethics committees. You see, again and again, these ICMR guidelines reiterate the role of the institution, and this cannot be reduced in any way. The chairperson is also appointed, although important once he starts functioning, the chairperson is also appointed by the director or the head of the institution. The term of the EC membership could be 2 to 3 years is the recommendatory. You may want to make it 4 years, you may want to make it less, but less than 2 years becomes too little for the group dynamics to work well. So at the least, it should be 2 years, maybe up to a maximum of 3 years, but whatever it is that you decide for your institution, put it down in your SOP. So write it in your standard operating procedures and do as you have written. And one more important thing that has been written in this at ICMR guideline is that EC members may be given an honorarium, a reasonable honorarium, as they say, for attendance. Now, there are a lot of discussions around what is reasonable. I think this is something that every institution has to decide for themselves and come to a conclusion that will be appropriate. Important. The head of the institution should preferably not be part of the ethics committee. It is not because he is not capable of functioning or serving in an ethics committee. It is rather because you need to have an appellate authority. Somebody should be there to whom you can go to if you want to complain about your ethics committee. If the investigator wants to complain about the ethics, if a patient wants to make an issue, or if there are any disputes about the functioning of the ethics committee, who do we go to if the director is member of the ethics committee and obviously will be chair or definitely close to the chair. Therefore, the director should remain outside and the committee should function independently. Another thing we have to remember, and this is also a very useful thing clearly mentioned in the ethics committee, that a person who is acting as the chairperson, not acting, is the chairperson of the ethics committee, may be a lawyer, for example. He can serve as the lawyer in the committee and be a chairman. It doesn't mean that you have to have 2 lawyers. Or a clinical pharmacologist, I am a clinical pharmacologist, for example. If I chair an ethics committee, I can do so without the need for having another basic scientist or a clinical pharmacologist on the committee. The same thing holds true for member secretaries. So the role of these two, of chair and member secretary, are additional. They are in a way, administrative. Like you are a professor first and then you can be the head of the department, which is an additional responsibility. So this is something that we should all remember and perhaps note. Important, alternate members, because often when you want a quorum, some people may or may not be present in the quorum on the day of the meeting. So it's always good to have alternate members who are adequately trained, exactly the same. They are shadow parliaments, they're shadow members, the shadow committee. So this committee has, this shadow members or alternate members have decision-making powers, remember. However, there is also a possibility for you to have a panel of experts, and it's good to enroll this panel, list that for this tenure, we will have these 10 people. For example, you may want to have a pediatrician because we don't have a pediatrician in the committee. You can't possibly between 7 and 15 have, but you may be reviewing pediatrics projects, or you may want to have a cardiology expert, and I'm giving you medical examples because I'm a medical person, but this may be holding true even if you're a social science institution. You may want to have subspecialties in that, and all cannot be represented. So you may have a panel of subject experts, or even you may have a panel of patients. For example, people living with HIV, you may have these people, one or two of them who are willing, or patient survivors, cancer survivors can be there if it's a cancer hospital, who can be consulted, but they do not have decision-making powers or voting powers, and they are there purely as advisors. But their advice must be taken, must be documented, must be written. They can attend the meetings as well, only they do not get to vote. Of course, it is important to understand that an ethics committee can raise scientific queries apart from ethical ones, although this ICMR guideline mentions that you could have discussion, you could have a separate scientific committee before it comes to the ethics committee so that much of the science is covered. You may have departmental review boards which look at theses and such things. But the bottom line is that a bad science makes bad ethics, and therefore an ethics committee will look at the science and may give recommendations. And that's why all this panel of subject experts are sometimes important. Thank you.